Chapter 1. The Birth of a Machinery of Fear. Germany, 1933. The nation stood at a crossroads. Years of economic hardship, political instability, and social unrest had pushed the country into a period of deep uncertainty. Across cities and towns, tensions simmered as competing ideologies battled for influence, while ordinary citizens struggled to envision a stable future. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. What followed would rapidly transform the country's political landscape and reshape the lives of millions. Within weeks, a vast security apparatus began to emerge, an organization designed to identify, investigate, and silence anyone perceived as a threat to the new order. At the center of this growing system stood a newly formed secret police force, known as the Geheime Staatspolizei. The world would soon know it simply as the Gestapo. Over time, the name itself became synonymous with fear. Yet the power of the Gestapo did not rest solely on arrests, interrogations, or detention centers. Its greatest strength was far more complex. It cultivated an atmosphere in which fear seemed to exist everywhere, influencing daily life and shaping how people interacted with one another. To understand how this organization became one of the most infamous institutions of the 20th century, we must explore its origins, its structure, the people who built it, and the environment that allowed it to operate. The Gestapo existed from 1933 until 1945. During those 12 years, it became a central instrument of state security inside Germany. It investigated political opponents, monitored groups viewed as threats, and worked closely with other agencies responsible for implementing government policies throughout the country. Following the end of the Second World War, the organization was declared criminal during the Nuremberg proceedings. Yet one of the most striking facts about the Gestapo is that it was never a massive force with limitless resources. In reality, it often struggled with manpower shortages and depended heavily on information provided by ordinary citizens. This contradiction remains one of the most fascinating aspects of its history. How could an organization with relatively limited personnel create the impression that it was everywhere? The answer lies in a combination of careful organization, psychological influence, and public perception. Long before the Gestapo existed, Germany already possessed a tradition of political surveillance. During the 19th century, authorities monitored political movements and public gatherings, seeking to maintain stability during periods of social change. When the German Empire was established in 1871, Prussia developed specialized political police units tasked with observing groups considered dangerous to the state. Over time, these organizations laid the foundations for a culture of domestic intelligence gathering that would continue into the 20th century. After Germany's defeat in the First World War, the Weimar Republic inherited many of these institutions. Political police departments continued operating, focusing on movements viewed as potential threats to public order. Ironically, one of the organizations frequently investigated during this period was the Nazi Party itself. Before 1933, thousands of cases involving Nazi members had been opened in connection with political violence and public disturbances. Everything changed once Hitler entered office. Control of the police quickly became a priority for the new government. The struggle to command Germany's security institutions would shape the future of the country and determine the character of what would become the Gestapo. Several influential figures played key roles in this transformation. Among them were Hermann Göring, Rudolf Diels, Heinrich Himmler, and Reinhard Heydrich. Each brought different skills, ambitions, and methods to the emerging security system. Together, they would help construct one of the most feared organizations of the modern era. As political power consolidated, the foundations of a new security apparatus were laid. What began as administrative restructuring would soon evolve into a network whose influence reached far beyond police work. The story of the Gestapo had only just begun. Chapter 2. The Men Who Built the System. As Germany's political landscape changed in 1933, a fierce struggle unfolded behind the scenes. The future of the country's security apparatus would not be shaped by institutions alone. It would be shaped by individuals, ambitious men whose decisions would influence the course of history. Among them, 4 names stood above the rest: Hermann Göring, Rudolf Diels, Heinrich Himmler, and Reinhard Heydrich. Each played a crucial role in constructing the machinery that would eventually become known throughout the world. Hermann Göring was one of Adolf Hitler's most trusted allies. Born in 1893, he came from a respected middle-class family and gained fame as a decorated fighter pilot during the First World War. His military achievements earned him some of Germany's highest honors. Following the war, Göring became deeply involved in politics and quickly rose through the ranks of the Nazi movement. By 1932, he had gained authority over the vast Prussian police force, which consisted of tens of thousands of personnel. He immediately recognized something many others overlooked: whoever controlled the police controlled the state. Determined to secure that advantage, Göring moved swiftly to reshape the police system according to the priorities of the new government. Working closely with him was Rudolf Diels. Unlike many political figures of the era, Diels was not known for passionate ideology. He was a career civil servant, a skilled administrator who understood how governments functioned and how bureaucracies could be used to achieve political goals.
Practical, intelligent, and adaptable, Diels became one of the key architects of the early secret police structure. He also selected the organization's future headquarters in Berlin, located on Prinz Albrechtstraße. Over the coming years, that address would become one of the most feared locations in Europe. While Göring and Diels were building power in Prussia, another force was rising in Bavaria. At its center stood Heinrich Himmler. Born in Munich in 1900, Himmler came from a conservative family and initially pursued an ordinary professional life. Few could have predicted that he would one day oversee one of the most influential security organizations in German history. In 1929, Himmler assumed command of the SS, originally a small elite guard unit. Under his leadership, the organization expanded dramatically. He envisioned something much larger than a bodyguard force. He wanted a nationwide security network capable of gathering information, monitoring perceived threats, and enforcing loyalty throughout the country. To accomplish this goal, Himmler needed exceptional talent. He found it in Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich was a remarkable and complex figure. Born in 1904, he possessed qualities that immediately impressed Himmler. Tall, disciplined, highly intelligent, and exceptionally organized, he quickly became one of the most influential members of the SS. Many contemporaries described him as calm, analytical, and extraordinarily efficient. He approached problems like a strategist, carefully examining every detail and building systems designed to maximize effectiveness. In 1931, Himmler recruited Heydrich to help establish a new intelligence service within the SS. The result was the Security Service, known by its German initials as the SD. Its mission was straightforward but far-reaching: identify potential opponents, gather information, and monitor individuals or groups considered hostile to the movement. Under Heydrich's direction, the organization expanded rapidly. What distinguished Heydrich was his ability to combine administrative precision with long-term planning. He understood that information was power, and he devoted enormous energy to creating systems capable of collecting, organizing, and analyzing vast amounts of data. As the years passed, his influence grew. Eventually, he became one of the most powerful figures within Germany's security structure. By 1933, 2 competing centers of power had emerged. On one side stood Göring and the Prussian police. On the other stood Himmler, Heydrich, and the rapidly expanding SS network. For a time, both groups sought influence over Germany's security institutions. But this competition would not last forever. Through political maneuvering, strategic alliances, and organizational expansion, Himmler and Heydrich gradually strengthened their position. Year after year, their influence increased, while rival structures
lost authority.
What began as separate organizations slowly merged into a centralized security system, unlike anything Germany had seen before. The transformation was still underway, but its direction had become clear. The foundations were being laid for an institution that would soon operate with extraordinary power. And once that process was complete, the Gestapo would enter a new phase, one that would fundamentally alter its role within German society. Chapter 3. The Organization Above the Law. The year was 1936. By this point, the struggle for control of Germany's security institutions had largely been decided. The balance of power had shifted, and Heinrich Himmler was emerging as the dominant figure within the country's expanding police structure. What followed would transform the Gestapo from a regional security service into one of the most powerful institutions in Germany. After years of political maneuvering and administrative restructuring, Himmler succeeded in bringing Germany's various police organizations under centralized leadership. The secret police now operated within a much broader security network, closely connected to other intelligence and law enforcement agencies. This was more than a bureaucratic change. It represented a fundamental shift in how power was exercised. As authority became increasingly concentrated, the Gestapo gained a level of independence that few institutions in modern history had ever possessed. New legal provisions dramatically expanded its powers. In practical terms, the organization could now carry out investigations and security operations with minimal outside oversight. Traditional legal safeguards that normally limited state authority became increasingly difficult to apply. For many citizens, this change was invisible at first. Daily life continued, businesses opened, families gathered, people went to work. Yet beneath the surface, a new reality was taking shape. The Gestapo no longer functioned like a conventional police department. Its mission extended beyond solving crimes or maintaining public order. Instead, it focused on identifying and neutralizing what the state defined as political, ideological, or social threats. The definition of those threats could change over time. That flexibility gave the organization enormous influence. In September 1939, another major transformation occurred. Several security and intelligence agencies were brought together under a single administrative structure known as the Reich Main Security Office, often referred to by its German initials, RSHA. Within this system, the Gestapo became one part of a larger network that coordinated intelligence gathering, investigations, and internal security operations across the country and occupied territories. The centralization process was now complete. For the first time, multiple branches of Germany's security apparatus operated under a unified command structure. Yet despite its growing reputation, the Gestapo remained surprisingly small. Popular imagination often portrays the organization as an enormous force with agents on every street corner. Historical records tell a different story. During its early years, the Gestapo employed only a few thousand people. Even as it expanded, the number of active personnel remained remarkably limited compared to the population it was expected to monitor. By the late 1930s, millions of people lived within territories under its jurisdiction, while the number of full-time agents remained relatively modest. In many cities, only a handful of officers were responsible for overseeing hundreds of thousands of residents. Some communities had little or no permanent Gestapo presence at all. This raises an important question. How could such a small organization create such a powerful reputation? The answer lies partly in perception. The Gestapo carefully cultivated an image of being everywhere. Unlike traditional police officers, many agents worked in civilian clothing. They blended into everyday life, making it difficult for people to know who was observing them and who was not. This uncertainty became one of the organization's most effective tools. People rarely knew whether conversations were truly private. They could not always determine who might report a remark, repeat a rumor, or pass information to authorities. As a result, many individuals began regulating their own behavior. They chose their words carefully. They avoided sensitive topics,
They practiced caution even when no agent was present. Fear no longer required constant surveillance. The possibility of surveillance was often enough. Internally, the Gestapo developed specialized departments focused on different areas of investigation. Some divisions concentrated on political opposition. Others monitored religious organizations, foreign intelligence activities, border security, or groups viewed as security concerns. This specialization allowed limited resources to be used with maximum efficiency. Rather than attempting to watch everyone, the organization concentrated on selected targets and specific categories of investigation. The strategy proved highly effective. By focusing attention where leaders believed it mattered most, the Gestapo created an influence far greater than its actual size would suggest. Its power did not come from unlimited numbers. It came from organization, coordination, and the widespread belief that it could see far more than it actually could. And that belief would soon become one of the defining features of life under its shadow. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Omniscience. One of the most enduring myths surrounding the Gestapo is the belief that it maintained constant surveillance over every corner of German society.
For decades, books, films, and popular culture reinforced the image of an all-seeing organization capable of monitoring every conversation, reading every letter, and tracking every movement. The reality was far more complicated. The Gestapo simply did not possess the manpower required for such a task. Even at its height, the organization lacked the resources needed to watch millions of people continuously. Yet somehow, it succeeded in convincing much of the population that it could. This psychological achievement became one of its most effective weapons. The secret was not omniscience. The secret was uncertainty. Most citizens never encountered a Gestapo officer directly. Many went through years of daily life without ever speaking to an agent. Yet countless people modified their behavior because they believed they might be observed. That possibility alone was enough. The organization encouraged this perception through both secrecy and reputation. Unlike uniformed police officers, Gestapo personnel frequently dressed as ordinary civilians. They blended into crowds, traveled anonymously, and appeared indistinguishable from regular citizens. As a result, nobody could be entirely certain who was listening. The stranger at a nearby table, a co-worker in the office, a neighbor across the street, even a casual acquaintance. Any of them could potentially pass information to authorities. Whether that happened often was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that people believed it could happen. Over time, caution became a habit. Conversations changed. Political discussions became shorter. Opinions were shared more carefully. Sensitive topics were avoided altogether. Many citizens learned to practice a form of self-censorship long before any official intervention became necessary. The atmosphere gradually transformed daily life. Fear did not need to be visible to be effective. It could exist silently in homes, workplaces, restaurants, and public spaces. A joke that might once have been told openly remained unspoken. A criticism that might once have been expressed among friends stayed private. The uncertainty itself became part of everyday existence. Internally, the Gestapo operated through a system of specialized departments designed to maximize efficiency. Different divisions focused on different categories of investigation. Some tracked political opposition groups, others monitored religious organizations, foreign intelligence activities, border security issues, or individuals considered security risks. This structure allowed the organization to concentrate its limited resources where leadership believed they would have the greatest impact. Rather than attempting to watch everyone equally, it focused intensely on selected targets. The strategy was highly effective. A small number of investigators could create the impression of much broader coverage simply by acting selectively and strategically. Files, reports, and intelligence summaries flowed through administrative offices where information was carefully organized and categorized. Names were recorded, associations were mapped, activities were documented. Each piece of information could contribute to a larger picture. One of the most important figures in maintaining this system
was Heinrich Müller. A highly experienced police official, Müller became director of the Gestapo and oversaw many of its day-to-day operations. Unlike some of the more ideological leaders within the Nazi hierarchy, Müller was often described as a professional administrator first and foremost. He possessed a reputation for discipline, efficiency, and meticulous attention to detail. His strength lay not in public speeches or political charisma, but in organization. Under his leadership, information management became a central element of the Gestapo's effectiveness. Records were maintained with remarkable precision. Investigations were documented thoroughly. Files expanded as new reports arrived. Every detail could potentially become relevant. Many senior officials within the organization shared similar backgrounds. They were lawyers, detectives, economists, and career civil servants. Some had begun their professional careers long before the Nazi regime came to power. They understood bureaucracy, they understood administration, and they applied those skills to a system that increasingly operated without meaningful limits. This combination proved extraordinarily powerful. The Gestapo was not merely a collection of agents conducting investigations. It was a sophisticated administrative machine capable of processing vast amounts of information and transforming it into action. Yet, despite all of this organization, one reality remained unchanged. The Gestapo still could not be everywhere. Its greatest success was convincing people that it could. And as long as that belief endured, millions of individuals continued adjusting their own behavior accordingly. The illusion became almost as powerful as reality itself. Soon, however, another factor would amplify that power even further. The Gestapo's reach extended beyond its officers and administrators. In many cases, its most valuable source of information came from ordinary citizens themselves. Chapter 5. The Power of Informants and Public Denunciations. If the Gestapo was too small to monitor an entire nation, then who provided much of the information it relied upon? The answer surprised many historians when they began examining surviving records decades after the Second World War. In countless cases, investigations did not begin with undercover operations, sophisticated surveillance, or secret intelligence networks. They began with ordinary people. Neighbors, co-workers, friends, family members, and sometimes even complete strangers. When researchers gained access to surviving archives, particularly those preserved in cities such as Düsseldorf, a striking pattern emerged. A large percentage of investigations originated from civilian reports. Someone noticed a comment, someone overheard a conversation, someone observed behavior they considered suspicious. Then, they informed authorities. The motivations behind these reports varied enormously. Some individuals genuinely supported the regime and believed they were helping protect their country. They viewed reporting suspicious behavior as a civic responsibility. Others acted for very different reasons: personal rivalries, neighborhood disputes, workplace conflicts, family disagreements, jealousy, revenge, simple resentment. The reasons were often deeply personal. In many cases, political concerns played only a minor role. A disagreement that might once have remained a private matter could suddenly become part of an official investigation. The result was a system that extended far beyond the formal boundaries of law enforcement. Information flowed from society itself. Everyday conflicts sometimes became entangled with state security mechanisms. A dispute between neighbors could lead to questioning. An argument at work could trigger unwanted attention. A careless remark might be repeated by someone seeking favor or attempting to settle an old score. This created an atmosphere unlike anything many people had experienced before. The uncertainty was constant. Who could be trusted? Who might repeat a conversation? Who might interpret a casual comment as something more serious? Nobody could be entirely sure. As a result, many people became increasingly cautious. Conversations grew more restrained. Opinions were expressed more carefully. Sensitive subjects disappeared from public discussion. Over time, silence became a form of self-protection. The psychological impact was profound. The fear of being reported often mattered more than the likelihood of an actual investigation. People adjusted their behavior because they believed they had to. Even when no officer was present, the possibility that someone might pass along information influenced countless decisions. Historians studying surviving files discovered another important detail. Not every accusation was automatically accepted. Investigators frequently examined reports, compared evidence, interviewed witnesses, and evaluated credibility before deciding how to proceed. Some cases were dismissed. Others resulted in warnings or brief inquiries. Only a portion developed into formal legal proceedings. Yet even when accusations failed to produce severe consequences, the process itself could be intimidating. Being questioned by authorities was enough to leave a lasting impression. The broader effect of the system was psychological rather than numerical. The total number of investigations tells only part of the story. What truly mattered was the environment that emerged around them. A society where anyone could potentially report anyone else created a powerful incentive for caution. People learned to think before speaking. They learned to avoid unnecessary risks. They learned that certain conversations were best left unspoken. By the late 1930s, this culture of restraint had become increasingly visible. Public criticism became rarer. Political discussions grew quieter. Many individuals chose silence not because they agreed with everything around them, but because silence felt safer. The Gestapo's influence therefore extended far beyond its offices and personnel. Its power was amplified by uncertainty, suspicion, and the willingness of some citizens to participate in the flow of information. In a sense, the organization gained strength not merely from what it knew, but from what people feared it might know. That distinction is important, because once fear becomes part of everyday life, it begins to regulate behavior on its own. No officer needs to be present. No investigation needs to be active. The possibility alone can shape decisions. And that possibility became one of the most powerful tools in the Gestapo's arsenal. Yet information gathering was only one side of the story. Once a person attracted official attention, another system came into play. A system of interrogations, detention, and administrative procedures designed to exert pressure and maintain control. The next chapter explores how those mechanisms operated and why they became such an important part of the Gestapo's reputation. Chapter 6: Interrogations, Detention, and the Machinery of Control. As the Gestapo expanded its influence across Germany, information gathering was only the beginning. Once an individual attracted official attention, a far more intimidating process could follow. Investigations, questioning, administrative orders, and detention procedures became central components of the organization's operations. These mechanisms allowed authorities to exert pressure while maintaining an appearance of bureaucratic order. One of the most powerful tools available to the Gestapo was a policy known as protective custody. The term sounded harmless, even reassuring, but the reality behind it was entirely different. Protective custody allowed individuals to be detained without the traditional legal procedures that many people associated with justice. Formal charges were often unnecessary, court proceedings could be bypassed, and detention periods frequently had no clearly defined endpoint. For those affected, uncertainty became one of the most difficult aspects of the experience. Many did not know how long they would remain in custody. Days could become weeks, weeks could become months, and in some cases, people had little information about when they might be released. This uncertainty created enormous psychological pressure.
The absence of clear timelines left many detainees feeling trapped between hope and fear. Families often struggled as well. Relatives searched for information, attempted to contact loved ones, and waited for news that sometimes arrived slowly or not at all. The administrative nature of the system made it particularly difficult to challenge. Documents were filed, orders were issued, records were maintained. Everything appeared organized. Yet behind the paperwork stood a process that granted authorities extraordinary discretion. Interrogations played an important role within this framework. Officials sought information about activities, associations, contacts, and opinions. Questioning sessions varied significantly
depending on the nature of the case. Some interviews focused on gathering facts. Others aimed to identify additional individuals connected to ongoing investigations. In matters considered especially important, questioning could continue through multiple sessions over extended periods. Investigators attempted to piece together networks of relationships, reconstruct events, and identify potential connections between people. Each new name could lead to another inquiry. Each inquiry could generate further leads. The process often expanded outward, like branches growing from a single tree. This investigative method allowed relatively small numbers of officials to pursue broader objectives. Instead of monitoring entire populations directly, they followed chains of information from one person to another. For many citizens, the possibility of becoming involved in such a process was deeply unsettling. Even those who were never detained understood that official attention could have serious consequences. The psychological impact extended far beyond those directly questioned. Stories circulated, rumors spread. Accounts of investigations became part of public awareness. As a result, many people became increasingly cautious about their activities and associations. The Gestapo also understood the importance of environment. Its offices were often ordinary-looking buildings that revealed little about what occurred inside. From the outside, they could appear unremarkable. Inside, however, important decisions affecting people's lives were being made every day. This contrast contributed to the organization's mystique. Its power often seemed invisible. People knew it existed. They knew it operated. But much of what happened remained hidden from public view. That secrecy amplified its reputation. The less people knew, the more they imagined. And imagination frequently magnified fear. Certain investigations became particularly significant when authorities believed they involved organized opposition or activities considered serious threats to the state. In such cases, administrative efficiency accelerated dramatically. Files moved quickly. Decisions were made rapidly. The full weight of the security apparatus could be brought to bear within a very short period. For those targeted, events could unfold with astonishing speed. This ability to act decisively reinforced the perception that the organization possessed immense power. Whether dealing with individuals, groups, or networks, the Gestapo sought to maintain control through a combination of information, bureaucracy, and psychological pressure. Its methods did not rely solely on force. They relied on uncertainty, on reputation, on the belief that resistance carried risks that few were willing to accept. And as the years passed, the organization's reach expanded into new areas of society. Political opposition remained a primary focus, but it was no longer the only concern. Soon, religious institutions and faith communities would find themselves under increasing scrutiny as the regime sought greater influence over every aspect of public life. Chapter 7: Religion, Resistance, and the Clash of Loyalties. As the Nazi state expanded its authority throughout Germany, political organizations were not the only institutions that attracted official attention. Religious communities soon became another area of concern. The reason was simple. Faith represented a source of loyalty that existed outside the control of the state. For many believers, religious conviction shaped their values, their decisions, and their understanding of right and wrong. This independent moral framework sometimes conflicted with the expectations of the regime. As a result, tensions gradually emerged. Not all religious leaders opposed the government. Some cooperated. Others attempted to avoid confrontation altogether. But there were also individuals who refused to compromise their beliefs, even when doing so carried serious risks. These figures would become some of the most remarkable examples of personal resistance during the era. One such individual was Pastor Paul Schneider. A Protestant minister from the Rhineland, Schneider became known for openly expressing views that differed from those promoted by authorities. At first, his comments drew criticism. Then came warnings. Later, official restrictions followed. Yet Schneider continued to speak according to his conscience. His refusal to remain silent brought him into repeated conflict with the state. Over time, the pressure intensified. Restrictions were placed on where he could live and preach. Administrative orders sought to remove him from public influence. Still, he remained committed to his convictions. Eventually, his defiance led to detention and long periods of imprisonment. Even under difficult circumstances, Schneider continued to express his religious beliefs. His determination earned him respect among fellow prisoners and made him a symbol of spiritual resistance. His story illustrates a broader reality. For certain religious leaders, the conflict was not primarily political. It was moral. They believed that loyalty to faith could not simply be replaced by loyalty to the state. This position placed them on a collision course with authorities who sought increasing control over public life. Jehovah's Witnesses faced particular difficulties. Their beliefs led them to refuse participation in activities that they considered incompatible with their faith. Because of these convictions, many members of the community experienced arrests, imprisonment, and other forms of official pressure. What made their situation remarkable was their consistency. Many were offered opportunities to avoid punishment if they agreed to abandon certain beliefs or commitments. A significant number refused. Their willingness to endure hardship rather than compromise their principles became one of the most notable examples of religious perseverance during the period. Meanwhile, opposition movements from other parts of society faced their own challenges. Communist organizations, once a major political force in Germany, came under intense scrutiny. By the mid-1930s, many of their leaders had been arrested, forced into exile, or removed from public activity. The result was a dramatic weakening of organized resistance. As formal political structures disappeared, opposition often became more subtle. Small acts of defiance replaced large public demonstrations. Anonymous messages appeared. Critical remarks circulated quietly. Expressions of disagreement became more discreet. Some individuals left symbolic signs of resistance in workplaces, factories, or public spaces. Others distributed leaflets or shared information privately among trusted friends. These actions rarely threatened the stability of the regime directly, yet they demonstrated that opposition had not disappeared completely. It had simply adapted to survive. Industrial workers also presented occasional challenges. Factories played a crucial role in Germany's economy and military preparations, making productivity a matter of national importance. Authorities closely monitored labor unrest, absenteeism, and other activities that might disrupt production. Even minor workplace disputes could attract attention if officials believed they reflected broader dissatisfaction. Reports from the period reveal that not every expression of support for the regime was genuine. Some individuals participated in public events because they felt social pressure to do so. Others complied simply to avoid problems. Private opinions often remain difficult to measure. This gap between public behavior and personal belief became increasingly important. The appearance of unity did not always reflect reality. Beneath the surface, a wide range of attitudes continued to exist. Some people were enthusiastic supporters, others remained skeptical. Many focused primarily on protecting themselves and their families. The Gestapo's role was to identify those who moved beyond private thoughts into actions that authorities considered unacceptable. Yet, despite its efforts, resistance never disappeared entirely. It changed form. It became quieter, more cautious, more difficult to detect, and in some cases, it emerged from the most unexpected places. As the years progressed, however, the focus of the security apparatus expanded even further. Political opposition and religious dissent were no longer the only priorities. The regime increasingly embraced policies based on racial ideology, creating new categories of people who would become targets of surveillance, discrimination, and persecution. The next chapter explores how these policies evolved and how the Gestapo became deeply involved in enforcing them. Chapter 8: Racial Policies and Expanding Targets. By the mid-1930s, the role of the Gestapo was evolving once again. What had begun as a security organization focused primarily on political opposition gradually expanded into something much broader. The regime increasingly embraced racial ideology as a central element of state policy, and the responsibilities of the security apparatus expanded accordingly. New categories of people were identified as potential threats, not because of actions they had taken, but because of characteristics, backgrounds, or identities that the state considered undesirable. This marked a significant transformation. The focus was no longer limited to political activities or organized resistance. Instead, entire groups found themselves subjected to growing scrutiny. Government agencies developed systems of classification, registration, and monitoring that affected many areas of daily life. Individuals were increasingly categorized according to complex legal definitions, administrative records, and ideological criteria. These classifications influenced employment opportunities, educational access, civil rights, and countless aspects of ordinary existence. The process was gradual. Restrictions often appeared one step at a time. Each new regulation seemed limited when viewed individually. Taken together, however, they created a framework that reshaped society. The Gestapo became one of several institutions responsible for enforcing these policies. Its role involved investigations, record-keeping, monitoring compliance, and coordinating with other government agencies. Over time, entire departments were dedicated to managing cases involving groups singled out by racial legislation. The administrative nature of the process was striking. Files were opened, records were updated, information was collected and organized. What appeared on paper as routine bureaucracy often carried profound consequences for those affected. At the same time, authorities expanded their focus to include individuals labeled as asocial or otherwise incompatible with the regime's vision of society. The definition of these categories remained intentionally broad. People from many different backgrounds could find themselves placed under scrutiny. Those who lived outside accepted social norms, individuals with criminal histories, members of marginalized communities, and others viewed as undesirable were increasingly monitored. The flexibility of these classifications made them powerful. Because the definitions could be interpreted broadly, the number of potential targets expanded significantly. This uncertainty created additional anxiety. Many people could not be entirely sure where the boundaries lay, or whether they might someday become subjects of investigation. The state also pursued policies influenced by contemporary theories of eugenics and hereditary health. Officials argued that society could be improved through administrative control over reproduction and public health. Today, these ideas are widely discredited and recognized as deeply harmful. At the time, however, they were presented by authorities as scientific solutions to social problems. Special courts and administrative bodies were created to oversee these programs. Thousands of individuals found themselves affected by decisions made in offices far removed from their daily lives. For those involved, the consequences could be permanent. Meanwhile, the Roma population faced increasing discrimination and surveillance. Government agencies compiled records, tracked families, and imposed restrictions that intensified over time. What began as monitoring gradually evolved into broader campaigns of exclusion and persecution. The pattern followed a familiar sequence: registration, classification, restriction, isolation. Each stage prepared the way for the next. By the late 1930s, these methods had become deeply embedded within the state's administrative machinery. The Gestapo was not acting alone. It worked alongside other police agencies, intelligence services, and government departments. Together, they formed an interconnected system in which information flowed continuously between institutions. This coordination allowed policies to be implemented with increasing efficiency. Every agency contributed its own expertise. Some gathered intelligence, others maintained records, others enforced regulations or conducted investigations. The result was a highly organized structure capable of affecting millions of lives. What made this system particularly powerful was its bureaucratic appearance. Much of the process occurred through paperwork, forms, registrations, and administrative decisions. Yet behind these documents stood policies that fundamentally altered the lives of countless individuals. For many citizens, the changes unfolded gradually enough that their full significance was difficult to recognize at first. Year by year, however, the scope of state control expanded, and among all the groups affected by these developments, none would experience more devastating consequences than Germany's Jewish population. Their story would become one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. The next phase of the Gestapo's history would reveal how discrimination evolved into systematic exclusion, and how exclusion ultimately became something far more tragic. Chapter 9. The Persecution of the Jews, from Exclusion to Deportation. Among targeted by Nazi policies, none faced a more systematic and devastating campaign than Germany's Jewish population. The transformation did not happen overnight. It unfolded gradually, step by step, through a series of laws, regulations, restrictions, and administrative measures that reshaped everyday life. In the early years after 1933, many Jewish families hoped that the political climate would eventually improve. Some believed the hostility would fade. Others assumed that the restrictions were temporary. Many continued trying to live normal lives despite growing uncertainty. Yet each passing year brought new challenges. Businesses faced increasing pressure. Professional opportunities narrowed. Social barriers expanded. The sense of security that many families had once taken for granted slowly began to disappear. For children, the changes could be especially confusing. Classmates who had once been friends became distant. Teachers treated students differently. Questions of identity suddenly became matters of official concern. Many young people found themselves struggling to understand why their lives were changing so dramatically. The introduction of the Nuremberg laws in 1935 marked a major turning point. These laws redefined citizenship and established legal categories based on ancestry. Rights that many had previously enjoyed were restricted or removed entirely. Marriage regulations changed. Social interactions became subject to new scrutiny. The legal framework of discrimination was now firmly established. For the Gestapo, these developments created an expanding field of activity. Investigations increasingly focused on ensuring compliance with racial legislation. Specialized units handled cases involving violations of the new laws. Reports were collected, files were opened. Personal relationships that once belonged entirely to private life became matters of official interest. The impact extended far beyond government offices. Ordinary citizens sometimes played a role in initiating investigations. Reports, rumors, and accusations could trigger official attention. In many cases, authorities relied on information provided by members of the public. This further deepened the atmosphere of uncertainty that had already spread throughout society. Then came November 1938. An event occurred that dramatically accelerated the pace of persecution. Across Germany, Jewish businesses, homes, and places of worship became targets of widespread destruction during what became known as Kristallnacht, often translated as the Night of Broken Glass. The name came from the shattered windows that covered streets in many cities the following morning. The scale of the devastation shocked observers. Buildings were damaged. Businesses were destroyed. Thousands of people were detained. Communities that had already endured years of discrimination now faced a new and more dangerous reality. For many Jewish families, Kristallnacht removed any remaining doubts about the seriousness of the situation. The message was unmistakable. Conditions were becoming increasingly hostile. After 1938, restrictions intensified at a rapid pace. Economic opportunities continued to disappear. Property ownership became more difficult. Access to public spaces was reduced. Daily life grew more complicated with each new regulation. Simple activities that others took for granted became increasingly restricted. The cumulative effect was isolation. Families found themselves excluded from more and more aspects of society. Friends emigrated when possible. Relatives searched desperately for opportunities abroad. Many hoped to leave Germany before conditions worsened further. Unfortunately, securing visas and immigration opportunities proved extremely difficult. As the Second World War approached and then began, the situation entered an even darker phase. Authorities moved beyond exclusion and discrimination toward large-scale deportation programs. Beginning in the early 1940s, Jewish communities across Germany and occupied Europe faced systematic removal from their homes. The process was organized with remarkable administrative precision. Lists were prepared, notices were issued, schedules were coordinated, transportation arrangements were made. Officials managed enormous logistical operations involving thousands of people. The Gestapo played a significant role in coordinating many of these procedures. Its officers supervised aspects of registration, notification, and transportation, while working alongside other agencies responsible for implementing government policy. For those receiving deportation orders, uncertainty became overwhelming. Many families had little information about their destinations. Rumors circulated constantly, questions multiplied, answers remained scarce. People were often required to gather belongings quickly and report to designated locations according to strict schedules. Witnesses later described scenes filled with confusion, fear, and heartbreak. Families carried what possessions they could. Neighbors watched from windows. Entire communities disappeared within days. What had begun years earlier as legal discrimination had evolved into a vast system of forced displacement.
The transformation was gradual enough that many could not fully comprehend where events were leading until it was too late. Yet by the early 1940s, the reality had become impossible to ignore. The machinery of exclusion had evolved into something far larger and far more destructive. And as the war continued, the Gestapo's role would expand once again. No longer focused solely on surveillance and investigations, it increasingly became an instrument used to enforce some of the harshest policies of the regime. The next chapter explores how the Second World War changed the character of the Gestapo and transformed it into an organization operating in an atmosphere of growing desperation, fear, and escalating repression. Chapter 10. War, Fear, and Escalating Repression. The outbreak of the Second World War transformed Germany in ways few could have imagined. What had once been a system focused primarily on controlling domestic opposition now became part of a nation engaged in a massive and increasingly brutal conflict. As the war expanded across Europe, the responsibilities of the Gestapo expanded as well. New territories came under German control. New populations were placed under surveillance. New challenges emerged that demanded greater coordination between security agencies, intelligence services, and military authorities. At first, military victories created an atmosphere of confidence. The German army advanced rapidly across much of Europe, and many citizens believed the conflict would end quickly. But as the war continued, the situation became more complicated. The longer the fighting lasted, the greater the strain on society. Resources became scarcer, families experienced loss and separation. Cities faced increasing pressure, and public morale gradually became a matter of growing concern for the government. Within this environment, the Gestapo assumed an increasingly active role in monitoring public attitudes. Officials paid close attention to rumors, criticism, and expressions of doubt regarding the war effort. Comments that might once have been dismissed as private opinions were now viewed through the lens of national security. As military conditions became more difficult, authorities grew increasingly sensitive to anything that might weaken public confidence. Particular attention was given to reports involving what officials described as defeatist behavior. Conversations, remarks, or public statements that suggested pessimism about the war could attract unwanted attention. The goal was not simply to punish dissent, it was to maintain unity during a period of extraordinary uncertainty. The turning point came after a series of major military setbacks. One of the most significant was the Battle of Stalingrad. The defeat shocked Germany. For years, many citizens had grown accustomed to reports of victories and advances. Now,
the reality of the war appeared very different. Questions emerged. Doubts spread.
Confidence weakened. According to surviving reports from the period, criticism became more common. People discussed military losses more openly. Jokes about political leaders circulated more frequently. Private conversations reflected anxieties that had previously remained hidden. Authorities responded by increasing their efforts to monitor public sentiment. Investigations expanded. Reports multiplied. The atmosphere became increasingly tense. At the same time, Allied bombing campaigns intensified. Night after night, cities experienced air raids that damaged homes, factories, and infrastructure. Families spent hours in shelters. Entire neighborhoods were transformed by destruction. For many civilians, daily life became dominated by uncertainty. No one knew when the next attack would occur. No one knew which parts of the city would be affected. This environment placed enormous pressure on society. As conditions deteriorated, the Gestapo found itself dealing with challenges that went far beyond traditional security concerns. The organization increasingly focused on maintaining order during a period of growing instability. People accused of undermining morale, spreading rumors, or expressing support for surrender became subjects of investigation. Authorities feared that internal collapse could prove as dangerous as military defeat. The closer the war moved toward Germany's borders, the more intense these concerns became. By 1944, signs of crisis were visible throughout the country. Military losses mounted, resources dwindled. Millions of people had been displaced by combat and bombing. The confidence that had characterized earlier years was fading rapidly. Within government circles, fear of internal unrest continued to grow. As a result, enforcement measures became increasingly severe. Actions that might once have resulted in questioning or warnings now carried greater risks. Officials believed that extraordinary circumstances required extraordinary responses. The distinction between maintaining public order and suppressing dissent became increasingly blurred. Meanwhile, resistance movements continued operating despite the dangers. Some individuals distributed information. Others assisted underground networks. A few attempted direct action against the regime itself. These efforts remained limited, but they demonstrated that opposition had not disappeared. In fact, as the war situation worsened, some resistance activities became more determined than ever. The Gestapo devoted enormous resources to identifying and dismantling these networks. Investigations grew larger, arrests increased, security operations became more aggressive. Yet, despite these efforts, one of the most dramatic challenges to the regime would soon emerge from an unexpected source. It would come not from foreign armies or underground activists, but from individuals operating at the very heart of the German state. Their actions would trigger one of the largest investigations in Gestapo history and reveal important truths about the limits of the organization's power.
The next chapter explores the July 1944 conspiracy, the attempt to remove Hitler from power, and the massive security response that followed. Chapter 11. The plot against Hitler and the Gestapo's greatest investigation. By the summer of 1944, Germany was facing one of the most difficult periods of the war. Military defeats were accumulating on multiple fronts. Allied forces were advancing from the west, Soviet armies were pushing from the east, and confidence within many sectors of the government was beginning to erode. Behind closed doors, a growing number of officials, military officers, and political figures had reached a troubling conclusion. They believed that Germany was heading toward catastrophe. Some felt that dramatic action was necessary to prevent complete collapse. Among those individuals was Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, an officer who had become increasingly convinced that fundamental change was needed. Together with a network of like-minded conspirators, he became involved in a plan that aimed to remove Adolf Hitler from power and establish a new government. The operation would become one of the most famous resistance efforts of the Second World War. On July 20, 1944, Stauffenberg carried a briefcase containing an explosive device into a military conference at Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. The plan was carefully prepared. If successful, it would eliminate Hitler and trigger a broader operation designed to transfer control of the government to the conspirators. For a brief moment, it appeared that the plan might succeed. The device detonated. The explosion caused chaos. Smoke filled the room. Confusion spread rapidly. Yet, despite the force of the blast, Hitler survived. The consequences were immediate. Within hours, authorities began identifying those connected to the conspiracy. What followed became one of the largest internal investigations in the history of the Third Reich. For the Gestapo, the failed assassination attempt represented both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge was obvious. The organization had failed to uncover a conspiracy operating deep within the military and government establishment. The opportunity, however, lay in the massive security operation that followed. Investigators moved quickly. Arrests began almost immediately. Documents were seized. Communications were examined. Associates were questioned. Every lead became valuable. Every connection mattered. The investigation expanded with remarkable speed. What initially appeared to be a small group soon revealed links to a much broader network. Military officers, civil servants, politicians, academics, religious figures. Many individuals found themselves drawn into the widening inquiry.
The Gestapo worked relentlessly to map relationships and identify anyone who might have been involved. Each arrest generated new information. Each interrogation produced additional names. The investigation spread outward in all directions. Thousands of people eventually came under suspicion. For those caught in the net, uncertainty was overwhelming. Some had participated directly in planning the operation. Others had only limited knowledge of events. A few were connected through friendships, professional relationships, or family ties. Yet, as the investigation intensified, distinctions often became less important than associations. Authorities wanted to eliminate every possible threat. The judicial process that followed moved rapidly. Special courts handled many of the cases. Trials were often brief. Verdicts were frequently predictable. The atmosphere reflected the government's determination to demonstrate strength after what it viewed as a profound betrayal. Public attention focused on the conspiracy itself, but the investigation revealed something equally significant. Despite its reputation, the Gestapo had not been all-knowing. The conspirators had operated for months within influential circles. They had communicated, planned, and coordinated activities without detection. One of the most important resistance efforts in German history had developed largely beyond the organization's awareness. This reality exposed an important weakness. The Gestapo was powerful. It was feared. It possessed extensive authority. Yet, it was not omniscient. Its effectiveness often depended on information arriving from specific sources. When those sources failed, important developments could remain hidden. The July 20th plot demonstrated exactly that. The organization discovered the conspiracy only after events were already in motion. Nevertheless, once the attempt failed, the response was swift and overwhelming. The full weight of the security apparatus descended upon the suspected network. For many observers, the crackdown reinforced the image of a state willing to devote enormous resources to protecting itself. Yet, beneath the surface, another truth was becoming increasingly apparent. Germany was losing the war. No investigation, no matter how extensive, could reverse the military realities unfolding across Europe. As Allied armies advanced and German defenses weakened, the Gestapo entered the final phase of its existence. The coming months would be marked by desperation, uncertainty, and a growing sense that the world the organization had helped create was beginning to collapse around it. Chapter 12: The Final Collapse of the Gestapo. By late 1944, the war was entering its final and most chaotic stage. Germany was under immense pressure. Allied forces were advancing from the west.
Soviet armies were moving relentlessly from the east. Major cities were suffering from repeated bombing raids.
Transportation networks were breaking down. Resources were becoming scarce. And for the first time, many Germans could clearly see that victory was no longer within reach. For the Gestapo, this changing reality created an entirely new challenge. The organization had spent years monitoring political opponents, suppressing resistance, and enforcing state policies. Now it faced something it had never truly confronted before: the collapse of the system it was designed to protect. As military defeats mounted, authorities became increasingly concerned about maintaining internal order. The fear of surrender, panic, and public unrest grew stronger with every passing month. Officials worried that morale would collapse before the front lines did. As a result, security measures intensified. People accused of spreading rumors, encouraging surrender, or openly criticizing the war effort faced severe consequences. The Gestapo devoted considerable energy to identifying behavior viewed as dangerous to national unity. Even private conversations could attract attention if reported to authorities. In many regions, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. Citizens lived with uncertainty from multiple directions. There was fear of air raids, fear for loved ones serving at the front, fear of shortages, fear of what might happen when enemy armies arrived, and still, fear of attracting official attention. The combination created a society under extraordinary strain. Meanwhile, the Gestapo itself was beginning to experience the effects of the war. Personnel shortages became more common. Communications grew more difficult. Transportation problems disrupted operations. Many experienced officials were no longer available. The organization that had once projected an image of complete control was now operating inside a country facing unprecedented disruption. Yet, despite these challenges, investigations continued. Reports were filed. Arrests were made. Files were updated. The machinery kept functioning even as the foundations beneath it weakened. In some areas, authorities became increasingly focused on preventing signs of surrender. White flags, public discussions about ending the war, and efforts to negotiate local ceasefires were viewed with suspicion. Officials feared that isolated acts of surrender could spread and accelerate the breakdown of resistance. As a result, enforcement actions often became more severe during the final months than they had been earlier in the conflict. The mood was no longer one of confidence, it was one of desperation. This distinction mattered. Earlier in the regime's history, policies had been implemented from a position of strength. Now, many actions reflected anxiety about an uncertain future. The closer Allied forces approached, the more evident this became. Entire regions experienced rapid changes. Cities changed hands. Government offices evacuated. Records were destroyed. Officials attempted to remove evidence of past activities. Some sought escape routes. Others simply disappeared. One of the most mysterious examples involved Heinrich Müller, the longtime head of the Gestapo. As Berlin collapsed in 1945, Müller vanished. Despite decades of investigations and speculation, no definitive account of his final fate has ever been established. His disappearance became one of the enduring mysteries of the post-war period. By April 1945, the situation in Berlin was catastrophic. Soviet forces surrounded the city. Fighting raged through streets and neighborhoods. Government institutions that had once exercised enormous authority were rapidly disintegrating. The security apparatus itself was fragmenting. Communication networks failed. Orders became increasingly difficult to enforce. The centralized control that had characterized the regime for years was disappearing. Finally, in May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe came to an end. For the Gestapo, the moment marked not merely defeat, but complete dissolution. The organization ceased to exist. Its offices were abandoned, its records were seized or destroyed, its officials scattered across a devastated continent. Some were captured. Others attempted to disappear. Many hoped to avoid accountability by blending into the chaos of post-war Europe. Yet, even though the institution itself had vanished, the questions surrounding its actions remained. How had such a relatively small organization exercised such enormous influence?
How much responsibility belonged to its leaders? How much belonged to those who carried out orders? And how much belonged to the society that had lived alongside it? These questions would dominate the years that followed. The Allies now faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you bring an entire system of repression to justice? The answer would begin at a city called Nuremberg. There, the world would witness one of the most important legal proceedings in modern history, and the legacy of the Gestapo would come under intense international scrutiny.